This is part 2. So last Wednesday I thought we were going to be able to do the full review of 2015 in one go in around about an hour and 15 minutes. But unfortunately that didn't work out, because I realised I've got so much stuff to get through, and after an hour and 15 minutes I was still going, so we cut it short, didn't we? So this is part 2. I'm just going to do literally about a 3 or 4 minute recap on last week, so you've got some handle on that, but we need to press on and have a look at part 2. So one of the things that we did, and I'm just going to show you this one video that we showed last time. So this video is ABC's News review of 2015, and I think it just gets us in the mindset a little bit as to what actually did happen in 2015. So for those of you who've already seen this, apologies, but I thought I'd just play it to you again. So this is a news organisation's review of 2015.
Breaking news. Masked men opened fire at the offices of a controversial newspaper in Paris.
2 armed men entered the building and began opening fire.
There's been a hostage taking at a kosher deli. Meanwhile, those 2 brothers suspected of the attack are holed up and cornered.
Terrorists who traumatized this region for 3 days are dead, but not before leaving 17 innocent lives ended.
Major new offensive launched by ISIS. The U.S.-led coalition is striking back. Are we winning right now?
We're still building the forces. I'm confident we will win.
The Russian passenger plane with 224 people on board crashes in Egypt.
ISIS claimed it had brought down the plane. Vladimir Putin is vowing to take revenge.
Devastating earthquake in Nepal.
This is the race against time. Brick by brick, the desperate dig to find survivors.
A growing crisis overseas. Migrants trying to escape their war-torn homelands, attempting to get to Europe.
President Obama is strongly defending that controversial deal to halt Iran's nuclear program.
It is a good deal.
You guys have been bamboozled, and the American people are going to pay for that.
Bamboozled, outmaneuvered, outnegotiated. Were you fleeced?
There's a lot of politics going on now.
Breaking news. This comes out of France, where a German wings passenger plane has crashed.
Disturbing new detail. The co-pilot intentionally crashed the plane into the mountains.
The terror group ISIS claims responsibility for unprecedented attacks in Paris in 6 separate but coordinated bombings and shootings.
The scene of the worst carnage at the Bataclan Theater.
Witnesses say they saw these shooters arrive inside and begin firing indiscriminately.
An international manhunt is now underway.
Police carried out a deadly raid. The suspected ringleader is in fact dead. The soul of the city is intact. They have heavy hearts, but they are not going to succumb to fear.
It seems another week, another tragic mass shooting.
9 people killed in an unthinkable crime in Charleston, South Carolina. What does it say about us that in 2015 somebody walks into a church and then shoots them one by one? The White House awash in a full rainbow in celebration of the Supreme Court's historic ruling on same-sex marriage.
We've made our union a little more perfect.
So that's what we had a look at, which is pretty disturbing stuff really, isn't it, when you see it all squished together. And we're saying that we live in the time of fear right now, just as Jesus said we were going to live in. We now live in a time when men's hearts are failing them for fear. So that was one of the points we made. Then we went on and we had a quick look at, a long look as it turned out, a long look at this particular country here, which of course is to do with Russia and what Russia has been doing in 2015. And one of the things that we looked at was that Russia has been preparing for war. So even though it might have taken us a little bit by surprise when we saw Russia beginning to invade Syria, if we'd been watching, then we'd have seen that Russia had been preparing for some time to invade the Middle East. And we looked at Ezekiel 38 verse 7 that actually says that Russia was going to prepare for war. Another thing that we looked at was the actual move of Russia into Syria, sending lots of fighter jets. sending troops, sending its most high-tech tanks, all into the Syrian region. And we looked at the significance of Syria, and again, looking at what's going to happen to Syria ultimately, which is what? What's the future for Syria according to the Bible? It's going to be finished. It's going to be destroyed. That it's on the way. You can see it's happening, can't you? When you look at pictures of Damascus, I was looking at some video this morning, which was showing before and after in Damascus and other cities in Syria. It's just unbelievable, the destruction that's happened there. Because, of course, it's gone on for years. The Russia move into Syria, really significant, because what we said was Russia is going to come down from its home up in Russia, of course, and come swooping down into Israel and beyond, into Egypt, in fact. So the stepping stone is, of course, through Syria. Russia hasn't sent its millions of troops yet, of course, but we can see the direction of travel. We also looked at the state of Russia from an economic point of view. So we showed that actually Russia needs to be in a financial pickle because that is the pressure on Russia to come down and do something about it. And what is causing the financial difficulty for Russia at the minute? Oil price. So oil price on Friday it hit a low of $33 a barrel. Russia needs $100 a barrel to break even, and at the peak oil was $125 a barrel only about 18 months ago. So that's the collapse in oil prices. They're really struggling, and with Israel there is a very wealthy nation, and with humongous gas supplies that it's only just found, this is now very tempting for Russia to control that geographical area and control gas supplies as well. All of that came out of Ezekiel 38 verse 13. We also looked at the fact that in Daniel chapter 11 it says that Russia is the latter-day king of the north. Anybody remember who the original king of the north was? Antiochus Epiphanes, based in which area? Scythians. Not the Scythians. He was actually, the Antiochus Epiphanes was based in what we now know as Syria. That was his base. So he was the king of the north originally, and this was sort of 200 or 300 years before Jesus was born, so it's a long time ago. But God says in Daniel chapter 11 that there's going to be a latter-day king of the north that exists at the time of the end. Now, of course, Russia is not Syria, but with Syria removed out the way, which is what's going to happen, that's why the mantle of the king of the north passes from Syria to Russia. And Russia will ultimately dominate the Syrian area. So I know we're gamboling through this very quickly, but we now move into the bit that we didn't get to. Okay, so this is pretty much where, I can't believe I've just squidged an hour and 15 minutes into no more than about 2 minutes, but just shows what can be done. So here we are. So the bit that, this is where we got to. So we're going to have a quick look at this thing here, which is Russia, the Bible says, will be protecting Iran. So come and have a look at Ezekiel 38. So in Ezekiel 38, just to remind you that in verse 2, we're talking about a Russian leader. So when it says, Son of man, set thy face against Gog of the land of Magog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Gog is a man. He was a real and historical figure from a long, long, long time ago. But this is a latter-day man. And we know that because of verse 8 that we'll look at in a minute. So this is a man that exists at the time of the end, who is called Gog, and this man Gog lives in the land of Magog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Magog, Meshech and Tubal are all territories within modern-day Russia. Okay? And Gog used to, this man that existed a long time ago, basically was chief or head of or ruler of the land of Magog, which is what current southern Russia is. So Magog equals southern Russia. We know this man exists at the time of the end because in verse 8 it says, after many days you're going to be visited, and in the latter years, that means in the last years or the end of time, you're going to come into the land that's brought back from the sword and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel. Well, Israel was only regathered in 1948, so Russia could not have done any of this stuff until post-1948. But the bit that we're just looking at here is in verse 7. We looked at the first bit, which was, be thou prepared, so go get yourself prepared. Get yourself ready. And what is he getting ready? Well, it's the huge army of verse 4. But notice then it says, be prepared and prepare for yourself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. So the question is, well, who is Russia guarding, and who's this great company that's assembled with Russia? And the answer to that is in verse 5 and 6, because in verse 5 and 6 there's a list of nations that join Russia in invading Israel. And which nation is first on the list? Persia, exactly. And which nation is modern-day Persia? Iran. So one of the nations that Russia is going to guard is Iran, because that's part of the company. Okay, so in verse 7 it says, you and all your company that are assembled unto you, be a guard unto them. Now what does that mean? Well, a guard, it literally means to be a protector. So if you go to Buckingham Palace, who stood out the front?
Guards.
There's the guards, isn't there? They are protecting the Queen, aren't they? That's what they're doing. So if I tried to jump over the wall, the guards would grab me and say, no, you're not doing that. So effectively, what Russia, we're told, is doing is protecting or guarding, looking after Iran. But also the other nations as well. But we focus in on Iran partly because of time and partly because Iran's first on the list, and it's obviously the key ally to Russia. So let's have a look at some headlines to see in 2015, was Russia protecting and guarding Iran? So this was January the 20th last year. Russia and Iran signed military cooperation agreement. August the 11th, Iran and Russia hold war games. Iran joined Russia in fighting against ISIS in Syria. That was October the 14th. Russia to provide Iran with S-300 air defence missiles, November the 8th. Does that sound like Russia is trying to help Iran? Sort of does, doesn't it? Providing them with these missiles. What are they providing these for? It's to stop anybody going in and bombing Iran who might not like Iran. Which nation really is not happy with Iran? Israel. They're arch enemies. But there's also another nation that Iran has fallen out with, just Saudi Arabia. So we're going to look at that in just a second as well. So it seems to me that this is happening and that God said it would happen. You know, it isn't as if we're looking at the opposite. The Bible appears to be absolutely bang on, doesn't it, in terms of what it's saying. But there was another really big news story in reference to Iran in 2015. What was the big news story, the biggest of the lot? The agreement
with America.
That's what it was. So after years and years and years of America and Iran being at loggerheads, suddenly out of the blue, there's this Iranian deal over its nuclear development. So on the one hand, you've got Russia that's supporting Iran, and on the other side, you've suddenly out of the blue, and this has been going on for 30, 40 years, the antagonism between Iran and America, I'm sure you know, suddenly Obama does a deal with this guy here. And on that introductory clip, did you see some of the senators over in America saying, you've been bamboozled? You know, this is dangerous. If you listen to what Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel says, he said this is a terrible, terrible deal because it's going to puff Iran up. It's brought them, you know, in from the cold and far from, you know, stopping them. It's actually going to encourage them. So here's what the Prime Minister of Israel said on April the 3rd. Netanyahu to Obama, Iran deal threatens Israel's survival. That was on April the 3rd. Fair nuclear deal to boost global security and peace, Iranian official said. Israel and Saudi Arabia present united front over Iran deal, July the 14th. I think that was the last one. So, yeah, what we've got here, of course, is Israel and Saudi Arabia are uniting against Iran. Now, why is that interesting? Do we imagine that
Saudi Arabia is the king of the south?
Right. Saudi Arabia is king of the south. So if you have a look, you're still in Ezekiel 38. Yep. If you have a look in verse 13, where it says there, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto you, Gog, i.e. Russian leader, have you come to take a spoil? Sheba and Dedan is Saudi Arabia. So this means that Saudi Arabia is on the side of Israel at the time of the end. So you've got this big Russian invasion that comes down, which is Russia and Iran, parts of northern Africa and Turkey, that all come down and invade Israel. But the opposing force, and those who are saying, what the heck are you doing, is Sheba and Dedan, which is Saudi Arabia. Who's Tarshish? Britain. And America and Canada, Australia, the young lions, the offspring. So Britain's like the old lion and the young lions are the offspring of the UK. So that's sort of quite interesting, isn't it? Iran's missile tests remind the US that tensions have not ended. Now that was December the 30th. So this nuclear deal was done in the summer of 2015. And just months later, here we've got Iran still testing its missiles, totally against what it agreed to do. Because, of course, the missiles are a major, major issue, aren't they? If they haven't changed their spots. Just come and have a quick look. Keep your finger in Ezekiel 38, because we might come back to there in just a minute. But have a little look at Isaiah chapter 13. This is a remarkable chapter that we haven't really got a chance to put it in context properly. But this is the beginning. Isaiah chapter 13 is the start of 10 tribulations, national nightmares that lead up to the return of Jesus. They're called burdens in these chapters. So there's 10 burdens, and these burdens are like worldwide problems that can't be sorted out. And the first one on the list is Babylon. Where was ancient Babylon? If I wanted to fly to Babylon, which country would I go to? Iraq. This chapter 13 is all about events that we've seen recently in modern day Iraq with Saddam Hussein and so on, but we haven't got time to look at that. But in the same context as this great trouble over at Iraq, have a look at verse 17, because we're told there, behold, says God, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they will not delight in it. Their bows shall dash the young men to pieces. They will have no pity on the fruit of the womb, and their eyes shall not spare children. Now, who were the ancient Medes? It was the Medes and the Persians, wasn't it, from ancient history? So the Medes are also exactly the same people as modern day what? Iran. So you've got Babylon in major trouble, or Iraq in major trouble at the beginning of this chapter, And at the same time that this happens, Iran is stirred up. Now, they're stirred up in a very unpleasant way. It says they don't really care for cash. They're not bothered about gold and silver. And what's interesting about verse 18, what do you think? Their bows will dash the young men to pieces. What is a modern day bow and arrow?
Missiles.
Missiles, isn't it? It's missiles. In fact, in Jeremiah, equivalent passage to this, it says their bows are made bright. So it's like they're flash. It means to flash in the sky. Is exactly what we see the Iranians do. They fire so many missiles, testing them. They're obsessed with their missiles. They parade them up and down on a Sunday and all start cheering and clapping as these monstrous missiles are, wheeled back and forwards, and they've written death to America all over them and death to Israel. Pretty unpleasant. Yeah, they are idols to them. And do they care who they hit with these missiles? They don't care anything. It says they've got no pity on the fruit of the womb. Does this picture fit in with modern day Iran? Sort of does, doesn't it? Most certainly does. But let me show you this. So this is from the 4th of January. So this is just a few days ago now. So you might have heard of this in the news. Saudi Arabia and allies square off against Iran and the rest of the world. Saudi Arabia defied the world on Monday, this is just last week, by escalating its crisis with Iran over the execution of a prominent Shia cleric, severing commercial ties and air links with the Islamic Republic amid a wave of retaliatory attacks. The Saudi Arabian foreign minister called for Iran to act like a normal country as he announced that all flights to the country would stop and all Saudi citizens banned from travelling there. Saudi Arabia's Arab allies, including Bahrain and Sudan, the latter once an ally of Tehran, announced they were withdrawing their ambassadors. This is last week. So what's happening is, because Iran has been bought in from the cold, Iran and Saudi Arabia are basically arch enemies. You wouldn't imagine they should be arch enemies, really, should you? Because they're all Muslim, aren't they? But does anybody know the big difference between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
Shias and Shias.
It's Shiites and Sunnis. So which one's Shia?
Iran.
Iran is Shia and Saudi Arabia is Sunni. So there's this now battle ideologically between these two players. America has always backed which one? Saudi Arabia, king of the south, you see. America and Britain have got military bases in Saudi Arabia. They've always backed Saudi. Who has always backed Iran? Russia. But of course, as we've just pointed out, the game suddenly changed in 2015 when Obama says, well, actually, we'll do a deal with Iran. We'll make friends with them. That now has completely wound up and destabilised the region. So Saudi Arabia now says, wait a minute, our biggest ally, America, is now friends with our arch enemy. We're not having that. So they start ruffling the feathers. They start messing around with the oil price. They start affecting the oil price so it hurts Russia and it hurts Iran because they've got more money than both. So they can actually pull the price down. We were talking about this, weren't we, Phil, as to why is Saudi Arabia hurting themselves? They are hurting themselves by driving the price of oil down, but it's hurting Russia and Iran even more. So then what they do a few days ago is execute a Shia cleric, i.e. somebody that's on side with Iran. They behead him, along with 47 other people. So Iran has gone berserk at this and said there's going to be a divine judgment shortly dished out upon Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia then says, right, we're cutting all ties with Iran, and not only Saudi Arabia has done that, but the other allies in the region. So if you were to look at a map of Saudi Arabia, it's surrounded by lots of Gulf states, like Kuwait and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. They're all very small but very rich countries, all Sunni, all allied to Saudi Arabia. And Sheba and Dedan in Ezekiel 38 covers, in fact, the whole of that area. So it isn't just Saudi Arabia, it is these other small Gulf states as well. And pretty much all of them have said, we're withdrawing our ambassadors, we're not friends, we are complete enemies now with Iran. Question is any of this in the Bible? Well, have a look at this. Now, this is one of the 10 tribulations. Remember I said that the first of the 10 starts in Isaiah 13. One of the others is here. Now, have a look at this. Might be worth just flicking a few pages to Isaiah 21. So what we read here, I'm just going to read a few verses here, and they're on the screen, but I'll read a few more. So in verse 1 of Isaiah 21, so notice we've got another burden. There's 10 of these burdens. The burden of the desert of the sea. Well, you think, well, hold on a minute, the desert of the sea, that could be anywhere. There's obviously a desert, and there's obviously some sea next to it. I'm going to show you that this is talking about the Persian Gulf area. So what you've got is the Persian Gulf, and on the one side of it is the desert of Saudi Arabia, and on the other side is the desert of Iran, and there's a sea that goes up between the two. So the burden of the desert of the sea, now have a look here, as whirlwinds in the south pass through, so it comes from the desert, from a terrible land, a grievous vision is declared unto me. Now check this out. In the Authorized Version it says, the treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously, and the spoiler spoileth. Go up, O Elam, besiege, O Media, all the sighing thereof I have made to cease. Therefore are my loins filled with pain, pangs have taken hold upon me, as pangs of a woman in labour or travaileth. I was bowed down at the hearing of it, I was dismayed at seeing of it. A little bit later in the chapter, in verse 13, you'll see that it's got the burden upon Arabia. Where do you think Arabia is? Saudi Arabia. So in this chapter, let me explain what we've got going on here. So first of all, we've got this thing about the desert of the sea. So it's somewhere where there's a desert next to the sea. And notice we've got whirlwinds in the south. And notice it's a grievous vision about somebody that's done a deal. But it's a treacherous deal. And the treacherous deal is by somebody that's dealing treacherously. See how it's repeating itself? Now, guess where Elam is? And guess where Media is? So here is Iran. There is Elam. It's in southwest Iran. And Media is just another word for the Medes, which is another word for Iran. The Medes covers this bit here, and Elam covers this bit here. Here's the Persian Gulf, look. On this side here is Saudi Arabia. On this side here is Iran. This is the sea, and on both sides it's just complete desert. The desert of the sea is what's... Now, isn't this quite amazing? So in this verse 2, it says, in effect, there's a treacherous deal done by a treacherous dealer, and in the very same breath, it says Elam and Media, or Iran, then causes pain like a woman in travail. In the very same chapter, it's got the burden upon Saudi Arabia. So I find that quite amazing. That, do you think we've had a treacherous deal? Yeah. Is that not exactly what Israel's saying? And not only Israel, but many senators within the US government are saying this has been a treacherous deal. You are not, this is not good. You're going to have this thrown back in your face. And what did we see but on December the 30th? But Iran firing its bows, its glistening missiles, carrying on in exactly the same vein as it always has. And does anybody really doubt that they've stopped trying to produce a nuclear weapon deep down under the ground, under the mountains, where they've got enormous cavernous places that they've built? Obama is basically not considering what the Bible says, which clearly does say Iran is not going to change. Iran is going to join with Russia and invade Israel. But you know something even more amazing? You see there where it says that there is, as whirlwinds in the south pass through, so it cometh from the desert, from a terrible land. Just watch this little video.
The second cyclone in just a week has made landfall in Yemen, an incredibly rare thing and a deadly one. Already there are reports of at least one death on the island of Socotra. Karen McGinnis is following the story and joins us now.
This area that is arid, desert, and not prone to tropical cyclones is seeing the second one in a week. It is statistically unfathomable. But as we take a look and just kind of zoom in on this latest, and that is it's already moved right smack across Socotra. That's why they've seen apparently hundreds of homes reportedly have been damaged or destroyed there. But now it's continuing its westward movement as a equivalent to a Category 3 hurricane. So it moves to the Gulf of Aden and then perhaps as a tropical storm considerably. But statistically, that we would see a tropical cyclone in this part of the world and two back to back really is staggering. We'll keep you updated.
Now that was November the 9th. So basically what we've got are these two incredible whirlwinds, hurricanes, cyclones that are going through exactly the same region. They're staggered by what they're looking at. It's so unbelievably rare, and to get one was a big news story. And in fact, what I've done to cut down on time, I didn't show you the first one where they were saying this is unbelievable that we've got one here, and then just literally a few days later there was another one, and that's why they were saying this is staggering to have two. And in fact, a few days later there was another similar storm that came in, which was again highly rare. All this is happening in November. Just like literally a month later, we've got Saudi Arabia and Iran cutting all ties. You know, this is what the Bible's talking about here, I think, as whirlwinds in the south. What did it say? The burden of the desert of the sea, as whirlwinds in the south pass through, so it comes from the desert. God says, when you see the whirlwinds, you're going to see all these things happen. And lo and behold, just days later, it's starting to happen. On top of all of that, we haven't even mentioned Israel. So let's just have a quick look at what's going on with Israel. Now, I've put this map on the screen to really make a very clear point. Here is Syria, and Damascus is around about here. These are the disputed Golan Heights, which are almost a sort of a buffer zone to some extent between Syria, and here is Israel. This is northern Israel. Israel comes down here, okay? But you can see how close Israel is to Syria. What nation's this one here? That's Lebanon. So, effectively what we've got is utter and complete calamity going on here. And all these nations coming in with planes and bombing and destruction, and America backing this, and we've got ISIS, we've got all this stuff going on in Syria, and Israel sat there. Currently, sort of in peace, isn't it? But you can imagine if we had got somebody just a few miles away where there's all this death and destruction going on, you're going to get slightly concerned that it might come over the border. Well, let's have a look at some of the headlines of 2015 in relation to Israel. So, Israeli official, Hezbollah will invade Israel in the next Middle East war. That was on January the 15th. Are Israel and Hezbollah on the brink of war? That was January the 20th. Vatican recognises State of Palestine in new treaty. That was May the 13th. Islamist group Hamas calls for another intifada as violence spreads to the Gaza Strip. Islamic State claims it fired rockets from Egypt's Sinai at Israel. That was October the 14th. Israel rejects any international intervention at Temple Mount, October the 16th. Israeli-Palestinian clashes continue as diplomats push for peace. That was October the 23rd. And then, of course, we've got this thing where suddenly we've got terror in Paris. Well, what has that got to do with Israel? Did the terror attacks in Paris have anything whatsoever to do with the situation in Israel? And by the way, there's a reason why there's 3 frogs on there, which we're not covering now. But look what did happen. Netanyahu urges mass immigration of Jews from Europe. 15,000 Jews to leave France for Israel, Jewish agency says, and you can see the big spike up there in terms of the numbers of people leaving France. Paris attacks and Brussels raids prompt Belgium's Jews to consider new exodus. That was November the 30th. Syria is dead. Israel must prepare, top defense official warns. That was November the 28th. Hezbollah, Samir Kuntar killed in Israeli airstrike on Damascus. That was December the 20th. IDF, Russian Iranian forces on war alert for Hezbollah attack on Israel and backlash. That was December the 31st. And this was a headline just a few days ago on January the 4th. Hezbollah border attack, first of more to come. So if I was to summarise what's happening in Israel, okay, so basically Israel sat there. There's a lot of pressure on Israel, isn't there, to give up the land with the Palestinians. So the Vatican has seriously weighed in this year, signing agreements with the Palestinians to try and in effect recognise that they're right to some of Israel's land. So the Vatican's seriously getting involved. You've got still the nations of the world trying to divide up Israel. Meantime, over in Syria, as we've said, lots of destruction, lots of hatred towards Israel, isn't there? Because which are the groups that really hate Israel that are nearby? Hezbollah and Hamas are the ones I'm thinking of, because the Hamas is on the Gaza Strip, with almost right next to Israel there, and then you've got Hezbollah, which were based in Lebanon but have currently gone over into Syria to fight. So Israel's surrounded by terrorist groups that just want to wipe Israel completely off the map. And what happened just in the last few days, which is where these headlines come from, is that Israel flew planes over into Syria, bombed a Hezbollah building, which killed one of Hezbollah's main officials or military leaders that was operating in Syria. Hezbollah have said, well, we're going to attack you back, and just a few days ago there was a border attack, and this headline says it's the first of more to come. Israel, you know, is going to get drawn into the conflict with Syria. We know that because of a number of prophecies in the Bible that speak about the fact that Israel is going to have an initial war with surrounding nations, nearby nations. So here's the plan. This is what's going to happen. This is the 3 stages of the final judgment of the world that sort of brings everything that we've spoken about, I think, together. Stage 1, well, let's deal with stage 2. So stage 2 is, in effect, the Russian invasion of Israel, where you recognise these names, so you've got Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Togarmah, Gomer, Ethiopia, Libya, all out of Ezekiel 38. So there's going to be a Russian, Iranian, North African invasion of Israel, including Turkey is in that as well. We've spent a lot of time as a community focused in on this stage 2, and perhaps we haven't really focused much on stage 1. Stage 1 that comes before Russia coming down is a war between Israel and the immediate surrounding peoples and nations. So like Hezbollah, like Hamas, like Syria. And you notice I've put there Psalm 83 and Isaiah 17. Just have a very quick look, flick back a couple of pages to Isaiah 17. And here's another burden. So we've looked at the burden of Babylon very quickly, or the burden of Iraq. We've looked at the burden of Iran and Saudi Arabia. Here's another burden. This time it's the burden of what? Now, is Damascus a major burden for the world? Massively, isn't it? Because basically the world are now to sort this problem out. It's a major, major issue for the world right now. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city. We've looked at this before. But notice in verse 3, it says, the fortress will cease from Ephraim and the kingdom from Damascus and the remnant from Syria. In verse 4, in that day it will come to pass that the glory of Jacob will be made thin and the fatness of his flesh will wax lean. What's another word for Jacob? Israel. What's another word for Ephraim? Northern Israel, yeah. So this is saying when Syria is no longer a kingdom, when Damascus completely is failed and removed from being a city, the fortress is going to cease from northern Israel, and Israel itself is going to be made thin. And the fatness of his flesh will wax lean. Now what could that mean? How could a country become thin and wax lean? What's it really saying, do you think? Weakened, isn't it? It's greatly weakened, might lose some land. But certainly it's in a weakened state. Has it survived?
Yeah.
It has survived. Only just, right. So Israel, this initial battle greatly weakens Israel. Israel survives, but then in comes this lot. Now Israel really didn't survive this, because Zechariah 14 says that Israel and Jerusalem are lost. It's ransacked, it's destroyed, it's ruined. So they survive this, they don't survive this. Ultimately, in the long term, of course, they do, because who's going to intervene? God, by sending Jesus back. Just to finish this, in Isaiah 17, have a look what sort of happens at the end of the chapter. So imagine the beginning of the chapter is Syria comes to an end, Israel greatly weakened at that point. Then, in verse 12, what have we got? Woe to the multitude of many people, which make the noise of the seas, and to the rushing of nations, that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. The nations will rush like the rushing of many waters, but God will rebuke them, and so on. That rushing of many waters is this here. It's the nations suddenly going swooping into the vacuum that's left. There's a great hollow vacuum that's left after stage one, and into it pour Russia and its allies. The third stage, and of course Jesus will actually appear in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory somewhere between stage 1 and stage 2. That's when Jesus is going to appear. The final stage, which we're not looking at all tonight or this morning, is effectively when Jesus has established himself as king on the earth, and then there's a war, a religious war against Jesus by mainly Europe and Rome. So this first war is about Israel, and it's I've called them Israel's relatives. They're not actually related to all of those people. But the first stage is about Israel and its relatives. The second stage is about Israel and its riches, the spoil that Russia wants to take. The third stage is about Israel and its religion. Those are the three stages. So what we see here, of course, there's Magog, Meshach and Tubal. That's modern day Russia coming down here into sort of Armenia. Here is Togarmah, that's Turkey. There is Iran, Persia. Here's Libya and Ethiopia. What stage am I showing you here? What's all this dark stuff? It's stage 2, isn't it? All that is stage 2. Where is stage 1? It's all this stuff right surrounding Israel. There's going to be a great big fire happen, symbolically, but there's a great big conflagration that's going to happen. And we're really close to that. That's pretty much the next thing that's going to happen. At the same time, we've got this Iranian-Saudi Arabian thing that's going on as well. But all of this is going to, at some point, be centred straight in there on Israel. The final bit to show you is that it isn't just, a couple of passages that talk about this. There's lots of places in the Bible that do. Here in Zechariah 12, we read about stage 1. Over there in Zechariah 14, we read about stage 2. So in Zechariah 12, it says, I will make Jerusalem like an intoxicating drink that makes the nearby nations stagger when they send their armies to Jerusalem and Judah. Does that sound like stage 1? It's nearby, isn't it? It's not like thousands of miles away, like Russia. This is nearby nations, nearby people. In verse 6 it says, on that day I will make the clans of Judah like a flame that sets a woodpile ablaze, or like a burning torch among the sheaves of grain. They will burn up all the neighbouring nations, right and left, while the people living in Jerusalem remain secure. So Jerusalem remains secure. It's northern Israel that takes the brunt of the attacks, and that's precisely where Hezbollah are, isn't it? It's north. Syria is north. So when the missiles, and I'm sure many of them will hit Israel, it's the north that's going to take a bit of a beating. Israel might do something utterly and totally cataclysmic to completely finish off the surrounding nations. Might even be nuclear. Because to finish off a whole city and cause it to never exist again is something that a normal bomb might not do. It might be a normal bomb, but something horrendous is going to happen to Damascus. It says that all the men of war in Damascus will fall in one day. It says that in Jeremiah 49. But you see how Jerusalem itself, in the southern part of Israel, survives. Zechariah 14, though, is different. It says, I will gather all the nations to fight against Jerusalem. The city will be taken, the houses looted, the women raped, half the population will be taken into captivity, and the rest will be left among the ruins of the city. So, actually, does that sound like Jerusalem has been secure? Sounds like completely the opposite. This is stage 2. This is when Russia comes into the void, into the vacuum. And then look in verse 5, the Lord my God will come. This is actually talking about the return of Jesus. The Lord my God will come, and all his holy ones with him. Or all the saints will be with him. Who are the saints? Who are the holy ones that are with Jesus when he comes? Those who are raised from the dead. Those who've been judged. So between here and here, there must be what? They must have been the judgment. Yeah, Jesus must have come and judged. Because you can't return with all the holy ones with him if they haven't gone through the judgment process. So the judgment happens between stage 1 and stage 2. Stage 1 is surely could happen any time. Could it not? Do you think? Because this man, Assad, is still in power, but only just. And we've got Russia bombing. We've got America bombing. We've got Hezbollah getting wound up. That everything seems to me to be in place for something to give and some disaster to happen. There's a great risk of war between the powers, isn't there? With all the planes flying around, all on different missions, all bombing different people. Remember, it says Damascus is about to be removed from being a city. And I believe Damascus is about to be removed from being a city. It is still there, despite there being a lot of destruction. It's going to completely be removed. And there we are again, look, that we've already read. This is coming soon. The fortified towns of northern Israel, or Ephraim, will also be destroyed, and the royal power of Damascus will end. In that day, Israel's glory will grow dim. Its robust body will waste away. The whole land will look like a grain field after the harvesters have gathered, the grain. That is where we're coming to, isn't it? You can see it coming. And then, as we've said, soon after stage 1 comes stage 2, where, like, it's not a literal tsunami, but God says, like a rushing waters, the nations are going to come pouring in. That's Russia, that's Iran, and the other nations that we've talked about. It all might seem quite depressing when we look at everything that's going on, mightn't it? With war, with tumult, with fear, with perplexity. The nations have got no idea how to overcome these things, apart from just sending more bombs, which just kill more people and create more crisis with migrants. The only answer to all of this, and it is the answer, and it will happen, is this. It's the return of Jesus to intervene. Because it actually says in Matthew 24, Jesus says, this is me putting it in slightly my language, but it's absolutely there, if I didn't return and intervene, no flesh would be saved. That means nothing would survive on planet Earth, not man nor beast. The whole lot would be gone. And you can see with the power of nuclear weapons exactly how, because that's on the cards, isn't it? Putin in the last few months have talked repeatedly about the possibility of using a nuclear weapon. Have you seen Hiroshima? Hiroshima was a terrifying bomb, wasn't it? Modern nuclear weapons are 40,000 times more powerful than what was dropped on Hiroshima. You imagine that? It doesn't want to be imagined. But that is the state of the world. When Jesus says, if I didn't intervene, no flesh would be saved, you can see that the world now has got the ability of bringing the whole lot to an end. It won't. Jesus will return. God's kingdom will be established. And all this horror and mess and these burdens and tribulations will come to an end when Jesus finally arrives and sets up his kingdom.